She never missed a shift, never asked for help, until one night she did, and when her boss learned the truth, he couldn't ignore it. Success wasn't handed to Donovan Hale. He earned every bit of it: long nights, missed birthdays, sacrifices that people around him would never understand. From a small office in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a multi-million-dollar logistics empire, Donovan built Hale Freight Solutions with one belief: hard work pays off. But tonight, as he finished reviewing reports in his glass-walled office, something caught his attention. The cafeteria was supposed to be closed, yet one of his employees lingered near the food counter. Tasha Winston. He knew her. Not personally, but well enough. She was one of those workers you never had to worry about. Always on time. Never complained. Never made a fuss. She handled double shifts like they were nothing. If there was a crisis, Tasha showed up. But now she looked hesitant. Donovan leaned back in his chair, watching as she shifted her weight from foot to foot. She glanced around, making sure no one was watching, then stepped toward the kitchen staff. He couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw the way the cook's brows pulled together, how they exchanged a look, and how finally, after a pause, a takeout container was handed over. Tasha murmured a thank you, before quickly tucking the container into her oversized tote bag. Then she walked away, head down, pace brisk, as if she didn't want anyone to see. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right. Donovan wasn't a man who involved himself in his employees' personal lives. That's not how he ran his business. You work hard, you get paid. Simple. But something about Tasha asking for food gnawed at him. She worked more than most. She pulled double shifts, sometimes triple. If anyone should be able to afford a meal, it was her. So why did she have to ask for one? Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe it wasn't his business. But as he glanced back at the report in front of him, the words blurred together. Tasha Winston, asking for food. That thought wouldn't leave his mind. But what if there was more to it? Donovan told himself he was being ridiculous. This wasn't his problem. He had a business to run, deadlines to meet, a never-ending list of responsibilities that didn't include shadowing an employee home like some private investigator. But as he stepped out of his office into the empty corridors of the building, his feet moved before his logic could stop them. Tasha was already outside. She walked with purpose, but there was something about her pace, hurried but heavy, like someone carrying the weight of exhaustion on their back. The wind cut through the parking lot, but she pulled her thin jacket tighter and kept walking. No car keys, no pause to look for a ride. She headed straight for the nearest bus stop. Donovan hesitated. This was crossing a line. And yet, when the next bus arrived and Tasha climbed in, he found himself doing the same. The bus rumbled forward, its dim fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Tasha took a seat near the middle, resting her forehead against the window. She looked drained, like someone running on empty, but there was no sign of frustration or self-pity, just a quiet acceptance of her circumstances. Donovan sat toward the back, keeping enough distance to avoid being noticed. What was he even looking for? The ride stretched on, past the business district, past the shopping centers, past the parts of town Donovan rarely thought about. At some point, the streetlights grew sparse, and the buildings turned from polished glass offices to aging brick apartments, their walls worn from time and struggle. Tasha pulled the stop cord. Donovan watched as she stepped off, adjusting the strap of her bag. He followed, keeping to the opposite side of the street. The sidewalk was cracked, the air thick with the scent of rain on pavement. Tasha turned a corner, walking past a row of flickering porch lights and rusted railings. Then she stopped. A small apartment complex stood before her, the kind that had seen better days but still carried the echoes of families trying their best. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, pulled out her keys, and pushed open the door. Donovan slowed his steps, stopping just before the building. Through the thin curtains of the window, he saw it. The inside was bare. Not the kind of bare where someone had just moved in, but the kind where someone had been living with nothing for a long time. A single mattress lay on the floor. No couch, no dining table, no signs of comfort, Just a few blankets, a pair of neatly folded clothes on a plastic crate. And then, two small heads peeked out from the side of the mattress. Children. Tasha knelt beside them, opening the takeout container with careful hands. The kids, no older than 5 or 6, scooted forward, their eyes wide with anticipation. She split the meal between them, watching as they ate with quiet urgency. She wasn't feeding herself. She had asked for that food because she needed to feed them. Donovan stood there, the weight of the moment sinking into his chest. He had spent years building a business, pushing employees to work harder, faster, longer. But had he ever really looked at them? Had he ever stopped to consider what happened after they clocked out? Tasha wasn't just working double shifts, she was surviving them. But now, what was he supposed to do with that knowledge? Donovan couldn't look away. Inside that small apartment, reality hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just about an employee struggling. This was a mother doing everything in her power to keep her children fed. Tasha watched them eat, exhaustion settling into her features. She didn't touch the food herself, just sat there, her back against the peeling wall, hands resting in her lap. There was a quiet resignation in her posture, not sadness, not frustration, just a tired acceptance that this was her life. The older child, a girl with tight curls and big eyes, ate carefully, chewing slower than her younger brother, who shoveled food into his mouth like he was afraid it might disappear. Tasha reached out, gently slowing his pace, murmuring something soft, something only a mother would say. Donovan's stomach twisted. He had spent years hiring employees, reviewing reports, approving budgets. He prided himself on paying fair wages. But standing outside that apartment, seeing a woman who worked more hours than anyone else still unable to provide the basics for her kids, he realized something was deeply wrong. The floor creaked as Tasha stood. She crossed the small space to a plastic grocery bag tucked in the corner, pulling out a single bottle of water. No soda, no juice, just water. She poured a small amount into 2 cups and handed them to the kids. That was it. That was all she had. Donovan exhaled, his breath fogging up in the cool night air. He had spent his life believing in the idea that hard work led to success. But Tasha was working harder than anyone, and she was still barely making it. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed. A gust of wind swept down the street, rattling a loose metal sign nearby. He took a step back, his mind racing. He needed to leave. This wasn't his business. He had already seen too much, but as he turned, a small voice cut through the night. "Mommy, are we gonna have breakfast tomorrow?" Donovan's feet froze in place. Tasha hesitated just for a second before brushing her daughter's curls back. "Of course, baby. I'll figure it out," she smiled. But it was the kind of smile meant to comfort someone else, not herself. And just like that, Donovan felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just an unfortunate situation. This was a broken system, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if just working hard was enough to fix it. But he couldn't just walk away now. Donovan sat in his car across the street, staring at the apartment building. The streetlights flickered, casting uneven shadows. But his focus stayed on that one small window, the window of someone who had been breaking her back for his company while barely surviving. He should have left. Driven home, pushed it all to the back of his mind, convinced himself there was nothing he could do. But he couldn't. Not this time. His phone vibrated on the passenger seat. A reminder for a meeting tomorrow. He let it go to voicemail. He had spent years making cold, logical decisions, separating emotion from business. But this was different. His mind replayed everything. Tasha's exhaustion, the kids waiting for food, that little girl's question. He had failed her, not as a boss, not as a CEO, but as a human being. Donovan exhaled, gripping the steering wheel. Money wasn't the issue. He had more than enough. The company was thriving. But somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself that as long as the checks cleared, his job was done. That was a lie. What was the point of success if the people making it happen couldn't even afford to eat? He thought about his own journey. He'd grown up without much, but he'd always had food on the table. Always had someone making sure he was okay. Had he really believed that just working hard was enough for everyone? The thought made his stomach turn. His company prided itself on offering fair wages. Was it really fair, though? If an employee could work double shifts, back to back, and still struggle to keep her children fed, then maybe he'd been looking at things all wrong. A harsh gust of wind rattled the sign outside. His jaw tightened. He couldn't ignore this. Tomorrow, he'd have a conversation with Tasha, but not as her boss. As a man who had finally opened his eyes. But would she even let him help? The next morning, Donovan sat at his desk staring at his laptop screen, but his mind was elsewhere. He had spent the night thinking, rethinking, overthinking. He had built his entire career on fixing problems, on finding solutions. But this wasn't just business. This was personal. A soft knock at his door pulled him back. "Tasha Winston is here to see you," his assistant said, peeking in. Right on time. Donovan stood, inhaling sharply before motioning her in. She looked just as exhausted as the night before. But there was something else in her eyes now, a quiet wariness, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. She took a seat across from him, hands folded neatly in her lap. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked, keeping her voice even. Donovan wasn't sure how to start. He had rehearsed a dozen different ways to approach this. But now, sitting across from her, none of them felt right. Finally, he just said it. "I saw you last night." Tasha stiffened. "Excuse me?" "I followed you home." Her eyes snapped to his, confusion flashing across her face, then something else, defensiveness. I don't understand." "I saw you take that food home," he continued, keeping his voice steady. "I saw your apartment. Your kids." Tasha's breath hitched. He could see it now, the way her hands gripped the fabric of her pants, the way her body tensed, preparing for humiliation. She glanced toward the door, as if calculating how fast she could leave. "This isn't. I don't need. I'm not here to judge you," Donovan interrupted, leaning forward. "I'm here because I should have seen it sooner. And I want to fix it." Silence stretched between them. Tasha swallowed hard, her fingers tightening into a fist. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't speak. Then, finally, she let out a breath. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Yes, I do," Donovan said firmly. "I should have done something a long time ago." She looked away, blinking rapidly. He could see the battle happening inside her. Tasha wasn't the type to ask for help. She had spent too long carrying the weight alone. But even the strongest people have breaking points, and Donovan wasn't going to let her reach it. But how could he help without making her feel like a charity case? Tasha's silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Donovan could tell she was weighing her next words carefully, debating whether to accept his offer or walk out of the office with her pride intact. Finally she inhaled sharply, her fingers still clenched. "I don't want a handout." Her voice was quiet but firm, and Donovan respected that. "This isn't a handout," he said, keeping his tone steady. "This is me correcting a mistake I didn't realize I was making." Tasha met his gaze, skeptical. She had spent too long being let down to believe in easy solutions. "I've worked here for 5 years," she said slowly. "I take every shift I can. I do everything right. And it's still not enough." Her voice cracked on the last word. Donovan felt that. He exhaled, nodding. "I know. And that's the problem. The fact that someone as hardworking as you has to choose between rent and groceries. That's a failure. Not yours. Mine." Tasha's brow furrowed, thrown off by his honesty. "You think raising my pay is going to change everything?" she asked, testing him. "No," Donovan admitted. "But it's a start." He leaned back, hands folded. "I've been running this company with the belief that hard work always leads to success, and for me it did. But last night, I realized it doesn't work that way for everyone." Tasha swallowed hard but didn't say anything. "I don't want you to struggle just to survive," Donovan continued. "No one who works as hard as you should have to." He reached into his desk, sliding a folder across the table. Tasha stared at it. "What's this?" "An internal program," Donovan said. "We're implementing it immediately. Higher wages, emergency childcare assistance, financial planning resources. Not just for you, for everyone." Tasha's lips parted slightly, but no words came. "It's not charity," Donovan clarified. It's what should have been in place a long time ago. She hesitated. He could see the war still raging in her. Pride, exhaustion, hope, doubt. Then, finally, her fingers twitched toward the folder. She picked it up slowly, her hands trembling just a little. For the first time since she stepped into his office, she exhaled without tension. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Donovan nodded. "Thank you for holding on long enough for me to see it." But was it enough to undo years of struggle? Tasha sat there, gripping the folder like it might disappear if she let go. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. Her face said it all. For years, she had learned not to expect help. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because it never came. And now, sitting across from the man who had unknowingly overlooked her struggles, she wasn't sure what to feel. Relief, gratitude, hesitation. Donovan saw it, felt it. So he said something he never thought he'd say. "You don't have to trust me today," he admitted. "I haven't earned that yet." Tasha blinked, caught off guard. "But give me a chance to prove I'm serious. Not just to you. To everyone here who's been working their fingers to the bone without anything to show for it." She nodded. Not in agreement, not in full acceptance, but in acknowledgement. Like she was saying, "We'll see." That was enough for now. As she stood to leave, Donovan did something else unexpected. "I want to meet them," he said. Tasha hesitated by the door. "Who?" "Your kids." Her grip tightened on the folder. Not in fear, not in anger. In something closer to disbelief. "Why?" she asked cautiously. Donovan didn't hesitate. "Because if I'm going to fix this company, I need to remember who I'm fighting for." Tasha didn't answer right away. Then, after a long pause, she gave the smallest nod. "Maybe." And with that she walked out of his office, her steps just a little lighter than when she came in. But was this just the beginning of something bigger? A week passed. Donovan didn't just throw money at the problem. He got involved. He sat down with his HR team, reviewed employee wages, and restructured the entire pay scale. Not just for Tasha, but for everyone who had been working themselves into exhaustion with nothing to show for it. He cut unnecessary executive bonuses and redirected the funds. He implemented childcare assistance, meal programs, and financial literacy workshops. No one would have to ask for extra food ever again. But most importantly, he kept his word. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Donovan knocked on a door he never imagined himself standing in front of. Tasha opened it, her eyes filled with something different this time. Not exhaustion, not doubt, something softer. "You actually came," she said, crossing her arms. "I said I would," Donovan replied. She stepped aside. He walked in. The apartment wasn't empty anymore. A couch now sat against the wall, a small dining table in the corner. The kids had backpacks hanging by the door, a few toys scattered on the floor. It wasn't luxury, but it was home. Donovan turned as two small figures peeked around the corner. Tasha's daughter was the first to step forward. She clutched a stuffed bear in her hands, staring at him with wide, curious eyes. "This is Mr. Hale," Tasha said gently. "Mummy's boss." The little girl tilted her head. "The one who makes the rules." Donovan knelt slightly. "I used to," he admitted. "But your mom helped me change them." Her lips parted slightly considering this. Then she smiled. A tiny, cautious smile, but a real one. "Good," she said simply. And just like that, Donovan knew. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about people. Hard work should lead to more than just survival. It should lead to a life worth living. And now, he would make sure it did. If this story made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's start seeing the people behind the work.